Good morning. Welcome to Rising. Thanks for tuning in. We have a very informative show for you today. Michael Schellenberger will be joining us to talk about some international threats to free speech with respect to the ongoing news, which, of course, first we have an update on the situation in Israel and Palestine. Briahna, nice to see you. Take it away.
Nice to see you as well. Well, Secretary of State Antony Blinken touched down in Tel Aviv yesterday, where he shored up solidarity and U.S. support for Israel's war against Hamas. Here he is speaking to press with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Let's watch.
We're delivering on our word, supplying ammunition, interceptors, to replenish Israel's Iron Dome, alongside other defense materiel. First shipments of U.S. military support have already arrived in Israel, and more is on the way. As Israel's defense needs evolve, we will work with Congress to make sure that they're met. And I can tell you, there is overwhelming bipartisan support in our Congress for Israel's security.
Vice President Kamala Harris gave reporters a similar message from the tarmac after touching down in South Carolina yesterday.
There is absolutely no justification for terrorism. The President and I take very seriously our commitment to Israel and to the people of Israel, to support them, and in particular to give Israel what it needs to defend itself.
Unfortunately, overseas, the bloodshed is continuing. Israel has formed an emergency war cabinet and called up more than 300,000 fighters from its reserves to bolster the country's response to this weekend's terror. With a potentially months-long ground operation in anticipation, the total death toll now nears 2,500 as airstrikes continue in the Gaza Strip. The IDF issued a sobering warning today to expect even more intense fighting in the coming weeks. This is 650,000 in Gaza now face water shortages, according to the United Nations. Meanwhile, in Israel, families of the estimated 150 hostages taken in this weekend's atrocities are desperate for hopeful news amidst threats that these hostages could be executed. The Biden administration says of the 17 known Americans unaccounted for in Israel at this time, those known to be hostages is a small number, likely less than a handful, but still a handful nonetheless. Kirby also confirmed U.S. intelligence and military forces looking at alternatives to evacuate American citizens in Israel, those who are currently able to leave via commercial flight. Now, a months-long ground operation. Does this mean a new official occupation in Gaza? That's what it looks like.
Yes. As we've discussed, Israel's choice to cut off water, power, and food to Gaza does constitute a war crime. But even more, I won't say even more galling, additionally, there is reporting, last night it was 9, now it's up to 11 UN staff members have been killed by IDF, including in addition to 30 students at UN schools.
Who's reporting that?
The Times of Israel. Additionally, the initial news came out in, I think it was The Guardian, but I have to look that back up again. So that's incredible that we're in a place where the threats that were lobbed by everyone from members of our own State Department to members of Israel's military to Max Miller, who's currently dealing with the discord around the House speakership battle, who have threatened to level Gaza into a parking lot and who have stated very clearly that they think that the population of 2 million people, including children, should be reduced to a parking lot. Those kind of sentiments are being played out in a way that is showing a great deal of indifference to humanitarian workers, to American citizens and others, potential allies who are caught up in this. The dead include 5 teachers, a gynecologist, an engineer, a counselor, and 3 support staff, in addition to the pupils, the kids at this UN school. It really is, I think the question many people are asking is, how many innocent deaths does Israel get to claim in exchange for the innocent Israelis that were killed by Hamas? What is the vengeance justification here for their ongoing killing that is causing all of these civilians in the Gaza Strip to be?
Well, I certainly hope no one is arguing that because innocent Israelis were massacred by Hamas last weekend, that it's okay to kill other innocent civilians, right? The killing of innocent.
Well, what do you think it means when Max Miller says we should flatten Gaza into a parking lot?
Why are we talking about what Max Miller thinks?
Well, what does it mean when the senior Israeli military official says that we're dealing with human animals and reflects that exact same sentiment?
The Israeli forces are very unfortunately killing innocent civilians in their effort to respond to Hamas. Now, I've criticized this effort. I think it is incumbent on them, and if they think through this, they should be worried about causing more of exactly what they caused in the first place, which is the growth of Hamas, which can be credibly tied now to efforts by Israel's government to kind of Pied Piper them, to delegitimize the Palestinian opposition by having the most extreme and most violent group become the one that speaks for them. That quite literally blowing up in their faces, given what Hamas has done, which is terrible and unconscionable. I mean, So I'm totally against much of the Israeli response. Obviously, Israel is going to have a counter response that involves trying to root out Hamas, and I think it is important for them to be thoughtful in how they do that and not cause more suffering and more casualties. But the reality is that they're going to go after Hamas
and they don't feel like
this.
That's the responsibility. I mean, something that we're hearing echoed. I just watched an exchange between Dr. Cornel West and Alan Dershowitz on Hannity. I suppose it was last night. And Alan Dershowitz argued, as many defenders of IDF's killing of civilians in Palestine have argued for a long time, that because Palestinians use children as human shields, any killing of civilians that are in Palestine is justified. I think facially...
Who said it was justified?
Yeah.
Yeah,
many people, including Alan Dershowitz, in that specific example I just gave you. So that being the case, you hear this as well. Well, it's so densely packed in Gaza, what can we do? If we want to root out Hamas, what can we do but starve the entire population? And now there's this discussion about a humanitarian corridor being open that will allow some people to leave. But there's two issues with that. One is that the humanitarian corridor would maximally allow 2,000 people to leave a day out of a population of over 2 million. So what are you saying? That the remaining millions that are there are just going to have to be subject to apartment buildings being leveled, no food, where was already water, 90% of the population was already unable to access clean drinking water before this crisis erupted. What about the rest of them? And the other issue is that many people are reluctant to leave because they're not being guaranteed any right of return. And it feels like, and is starting to increasingly resemble, a method for ethnic cleansing, ultimately getting Palestinians out of the land and never allowing them to return. So this is a grave
these are all very bad consequences for which Hamas deserves a lot of blame for causing to take place. The deaths of these innocent people are substantially on this is Hamas's fault. Hamas launched a terrorist attack, indiscriminately killing Israeli civilians, gunning down people in their homes and at bus stations. We've seen the footage of bodies of non-combatants everywhere. The reality is there is going to be a military response to capture, kill, and neutralize the terrorist forces that did that. And I would hope and pray that response is as surgical and limited as possible to not involve civilian deaths. But Hamas probably wants it to be as bloody a reprisal as possible because
Israel, it seems to be acting in a way that suggests that it wants it to be as bloody a reprisal as possible because they are doing what is a violation of international law and enacting collective punishment on the entire 2.3 million population of the Gaza Strip.
Right. Well, I have criticized that a lot, but I don't want to minimize the fact that we're in this situation because of the galling, horrific acts of a terrorist group.
So the real question the public has to answer is how many galling, horrific acts enacted on children, humanitarian aid workers, non-Palestinians who are living on the Gaza Strip are justified, including the fact that they're being funded with our tax dollars.
Let's not draw some equivalency here, because the Israelis have not entered Gaza and started indiscriminately, purposefully targeting civilians the way Hamas did. Hamas killed innocent people on purpose, and that is a lot worse and worth calling out.
Okay, so I'm asking the question now, how many people does Israel get to kill in Gaza indiscriminately, and how many do they get to starve and kill by turning off the electricity and water so that medical personnel in Gaza cannot treat the victims of the airstrikes that have killed over 1,000 people in the Gaza Strip, including a number of humanitarian aid workers and 30 children that attend the UN school in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I just don't want to overlook Hamas's extreme responsibility for this situation. We both of us have continuously criticized and called out the Israeli response, and also I have called out, and you have as well, the U.S.'s support for the Israeli response, which I don't endorse and do not believe we should fund whatsoever. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't point the blame squarely where it belongs in the acts of a terrorist organization.
Yeah, I think a lot of blame also lies on Israel's choice to continually occupy 2.3 million people, and also the ongoing reporting of how Bibi Netanyahu, as you mentioned earlier, boosted Hamas as a less sympathetic, shall we say, representative or political body in the Gaza Strip that could be used to justify the exact kinds of horrific attacks that are being siege is the word that was used.
Yeah, but there's in fact no justification for the terrorist acts that occurred, contrary to what so many American university students and Black Lives Matter groups seem to think. But there is no justification.
All right, so the question that people have to ask is, I'm sorry, I just read that news before we came on. I'm a little rattled by it, having gone to an international school myself and having a parent who was a humanitarian aid worker for many years, that they can act with impunity, and our ally can act with impunity in that way and kill citizens of the world in that way. And for that we're not even able to take a beat to acknowledge the horror without immediately jumping in and saying, well, somebody else did something bad. Hamas is a terrorist group that should be held accountable. But I'm not hearing much of any conversation about our ally Israel and the money that we're sending to Israel being held accountable for killing children, Palestinian children first and foremost, but now also international aid workers and their children in their homes. But, we'll continue to see that, cover that story as it develops. Stick around. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.